morning, everybody.
Hello.
Thank you. Otherwise, we could have just packed up and gone home. My name is Anne Swain. I'm the CEO of APSCo, so the trade association for the professional recruitment market. And I've been asked to chair this session of Industry Insights, which obviously is hosted by Kingsbridge. Thank you for them to putting it on. Thank you to Michelle, who's done all the work and got everything very well organised, I might say, with regard to getting us here. What we're going to do is have a couple of speakers that will look at what's going on in the market, what the trends are. I don't know if there's going to be an update on Brexit 1 minute to the next. 3 o'clock there was a big meeting at the House of Commons. Lord knows what's come out of that. So let's just see, but what the market trends are. And then we're going to look at, from a post-budget point of view, what's been going on and what effect that's likely to have on the recruitment market. We're then going to have a panel where you have an opportunity to ask questions. And what I would say is don't be shy at that stage. It can be a drag at these kind of things when people don't put their hand up, and then at the very end everyone wants to ask the questions and they're kicking themselves because they didn't get around to doing it. So we are recruitment people, do not be shy. John Nurthen is a mate of mine. I've known him for a very long period of time. He's had over 25 years experience within the recruitment market, and he heads up the staffing industry analysts, pretty much everything outside of America, I've said these days, isn't it?
It's the research.
The research side, yeah, okay, the research side of staffing industry analysts. Staffing industry analysts are the body that do all the research within the recruitment market, in the RPO market, and across that board. So if anybody knows what trends are in the recruitment market, John is your guy. So I'm going to ask John to come up. Then we're going to head off after that with John Chaplin, who's also a pretty knowledgeable chap. And John from EY, he's Associate Director there, is going to look at, from a taxation point of view, from the budget point of view, what is happening afterwards. And then we're going to get involved in our panel. I'll introduce our panel members when we get to that stage, because otherwise you won't remember their names anyway. So here we go. John Nurthen, I recognise that face. You're in.
Thank you. Okay, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So you trained them well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'll start with just a few slides explaining who we are, and gave you a brief description. But as she said, we're a research company. We focus on the staffing industry, obviously. Our clients are these people on the top right-hand quadrant, the temporary staffing firms, companies that provide permanent recruitment, other sorts of providers as well. Then the intermediaries, RPOs, HROs, MSPs, VMSs, job boards as well. Companies that are interested in our market, so a lot of big consulting firms get the benefit of our research. Investment firms that are interested in investing in publicly listed staffing firms, but also corporate buyers. About 15 years ago, when MSP appeared and nobody really knew what it was, how to sell it, how to buy it, we realised there was an opportunity to actually help buyers understand this market as well. So our customers among the buyers include these companies here, which you can see is a prestigious list of large international companies across many different sectors. And we advise these companies on contingent procurement. So I think it puts us in quite a unique position, because we can understand what the issues are from the perspective of the suppliers, but also from the buyers. My favourite member is actually Walt Disney. You may not be aware, but if you go to one of their theme parks and you see Mickey Mouse, the person in that costume is a temporary worker. Just, I shouldn't be telling secrets about our clients, but don't tell your kids either, spoil the illusion. So I'm going to talk about two issues. I'm going to give you an overview of the UK market as we see it, and then talk about some of the bigger trends that we see impacting all staffing markets globally, and what that might mean for us in the future. So a little bit about how the UK fits into the global staffing market. As you can see, we have a value of $461 billion in 2017 for global staffing industry. That sounds like a big number. To help you put it into perspective, that's about the annual revenue for Walmart. So the staffing industry, it's a big industry, but it's certainly not as big as some other sectors. So the UK, as you can see, is the third largest market in the world. All these circles are to scale. US is the biggest market. If you add up all those European circles, that's actually bigger than the US market. Japan is a very significant market which has grown quite surprisingly because it was illegal to provide temporary agency workers until the 1990s. So the fact that we've got a tiny island that's half the size of the US market now is quite extraordinary. And what we see is a lot of Japanese staffing agencies who've been very successful coming into European markets and other markets, acquiring staffing firms. We do forecasts on all the major staffing markets, and I just highlighted the UK one for you here. It struck me when I looked at this that it looks like we've not tried very hard, because we've got the UK at 2% for 2017, 2018 and 2019. I can assure you that there's a hell of a lot of work that goes into trying to come up with those numbers. Some of the markets that we cover, it's easy to predict what's happening. The French market, the Belgian market, there's industry data that gives you a very solid picture of what's happening. The UK market is a nightmare, and of course it's a nightmare at the moment because there's a lot of uncertainty. So we actually upgraded the UK this year. We upgrade the forecast every 6 months. We had it at 0 at the beginning of this year. Surprisingly, it's doing okay. It's doing better than we thought it would do. And maybe it's because what Brexit means is, of course, uncertainty. And uncertainty isn't necessarily a bad thing for the staffing industry. If employers are unsure what's going to happen, well, then maybe they'll be using more temporary workers. So maybe that's what's happening in the UK market. But I think our predictions for the UK market, I would say we're not that confident about them. If it was much stronger than that or much weaker than that, I wouldn't be too shocked. Another interesting thing about the UK market, so you can get some statistics. So this is from Eurostat, which is the European Statistical Authority, but they'll get their data from the UK Office of National Statistics. And this is all temporary workers, so this isn't temporary agency workers, going back to 1996. I think what's surprising is that you can see there's precious little structural growth there. So while we think temporary agency workers growing, what the national data is suggesting is actually, despite everything you read about casualisation of the workforce, the fact that more and more people are working on a temporary basis, the numbers don't really tend to suggest that. If there are more people working as temporary agency workers or more people working as freelancers through online staffing platforms, then it seems that they may be doing it at the cost of other forms of temporary work. It's not necessarily permanent workers becoming temporary. And if you plot that against UK GDP, so this is the total value of the UK economy, you can see it was here in 1996. UK economy has actually grown, obviously dipped during the recession, and it is now much bigger than it was in 1996. Temporary work overall hasn't grown over that period. So our data was published in September, our latest forecast. The big staffing firms published their latest Q3 numbers, and that does suggest a somewhat worrying slowdown in continental Europe. You can see what Adecco, Manpower and Randstad reported for the UK market. So our 2% looks there or thereabouts if you look at it from the big agency perspective. France, 5% seems pretty good, but that market was growing much quicker at the beginning of the year. Germany was in positive growth at the beginning of the year, is now negative because legislation has grown. Italy, that doesn't sound too bad, does it? But that market was growing at 16% at the beginning of the year. So there's been a sharp decline there as well. Same with Netherlands and Belgium. So whether or not that's just a temporary blip or whether or not actually continental European staffing markets are really slowing down remains to be seen. All those companies flagged the fact that Q4 was looking to be about the same rate as Q3. So the UK market, we have it valued for 2017 of almost £32 billion. You can see here the number of agencies. So we measure the number of agencies, and this is the number of agencies as of March 2018. There are various ways of getting this data. We look at businesses that are actually registered to pay VAT because we figure that probably means that they're making some money. There's a lot of agencies registered that actually don't seem to be functioning. I think what's interesting for those of you based here in London, you can see London dominates the UK market, 9,480 agencies based in London, 34% of the total. Other than that, it's sort of this East Anglia region. There's lots of agencies, but the market elsewhere is pretty strong. Actually, it's pretty in the southeast as well. There's a number of agencies there. If you look at the London market, we can also look at the number of agencies in London. You can see where we are today. 3,165 agencies in the City of London. It's probably the most concentrated staffing market in the world. If you go back, so 3,165, you can see that's bigger than most of these other territories. So there's just the 1 square mile of London. If you look at Camden, 515 agencies registered in Camden, 475 registered in the whole of Wales. What we can also see from the registered agencies is how much revenue they have. And as you can see, this is a pretty typical picture that you'd get from any market. There aren't that many big agencies. Most of the agencies operating in the UK are sort of small mom and pop agencies. There's only 165 agencies that have got revenue in excess of 50 million. And if you're wondering why it's so tough to grow your margins in the UK staffing market, that's probably the reason. It's a very competitive market. So 28,000 agencies in total. That compares to 19,000 in the whole of the US. So UK market much smaller than the US, but a lot more staffing firms. Margins are much better in the US market than they are in the UK. We measured 3,000 extra agencies this year, so the market's grown by about 9% this year. So despite all the concerns about Brexit, it seems that there are plenty of people that still think the staffing industry is an interesting sector to get into. Stop cooperating. UK staffing firms, we measure the largest staffing firms, so I think we look at the top 100, this is the top 10. And we do this for most countries, look at who the big agencies are. And you can see, you're probably not surprised that some of these agencies at the top, APSCo, Randstad and Manpower tend to dominate a lot of markets. If you add up all the revenue for these companies, it's about 30% of the total UK market, which means the UK is quite a fragmented market. Similar to the US, a lot of the English-speaking markets are quite fragmented. France is quite different. You've got 3 agencies that have got about 80% of the total market. Netherlands, Randstad mostly dominates the Dutch market, for instance. Another report that we do is looking at the most attractive staffing sectors, and I won't go into the detail of this because we don't have time, but we look at across a number of different categories as to what makes the staffing market attractive. You see, generally it's looking at the size of the market, what the salary trends are, what the level of current demand is, and what the future demand might be. And we come up with a scoring, so if you can't see from the back, if it's a green box, that's generally good. If it's a purple box, that's generally bad. And you can see we believe that the most exciting space to be in at the moment is marketing creative, followed by IT. At the bottom, we've got office clerical, finance and accounting. Interestingly, not faring so well within our assessment at the moment. I think that could be to do with the fact that the long-term trends are not so positive for finance and accounting when you look at the data and the impact of automation. Overhanging all of that is, of course, Brexit, and I'm guessing that maybe half of the audience is looking at that and seeing a positive picture, and half are looking at it and thinking, oh shit. I don't know whether anybody saw the political declaration that was announced yesterday, but I took the trouble of reading all 26 pages of it, just to see whether I could give you any insight into how this may be affecting the UK staffing market. Just to give you a little flavour, it says things such as the parties are agreed that the future relationship should be approached with high ambition with regard to its scope and depth, and recognise that this might evolve over time. The parties will retain their autonomy and ability to regulate economic activity according to the levels of protection each deems appropriate in order to achieve legitimate public policy objectives. The UK will consider aligning with union rules in relevant areas. So it goes on like that for about 26 pages. In effect, it's a load of waffle. It seems to be a document that gives everybody what they want and nobody what they want. So quite where we'll end up, because, of course, what has been proposed by the government may not get approved by the Spanish, let alone by Theresa May's own party. So there's still a lot of uncertainty out there. Anybody expecting that uncertainty to finish by the time we get to February, may be disappointing, because it seems like what has been agreed is to kick things into the long grass, and how this may affect the staffing market is going to remain uncertain. Will we still have to abide by European rules? The answer is maybe. One thing that does seem sure is that it's going to make it more difficult for talent to come into the UK market, and those of you that rely on staff to access talent, that will obviously be a concern for you. So I think that's probably the only thing we can say with any certainty is going to impact the UK staffing market. So where are we going to go in the UK? Well, this is, again, it shows you what the revenue is, and where might we go? Well, anywhere there really. Your guess is as good as mine. So I'm not so confident the UK market is the best staffing market to be in. We track other staffing markets that we regard as more attractive. They're more attractive because they've got faster growth rates, they're better business environment, many other factors. And markets, for example, such as Ireland and Sweden and Italy, up until recently, were regarded as more attractive from the UK market. I think when we ranked about 60 different international markets, we had the UK staffing market at about 40th. It doesn't mean to say, for those of you here, I realise that's a depressing message, of course you can make money in any market, and I'm sure many of you are successful in this market as well. If you do have international ambitions, the good news is that there are probably other countries in the world where you can be just as successful, if not more successful. We do track some of the sectors in the UK with APSCo members, so we work with APSCo to collate industry trends. This shows you permanent vacancies and temporary contractor vacancies that were given. I think we have a basket of just over 40 companies that participate in this. And as you can see, the vacancies that have been given have been indexed back to 100, going back in time. And mostly there are fewer vacancies being given to staffing firms. The only one that looks positive is finance, but as you can see, there was a big dip in 2017. I think this was a result of Brexit. There's a bit of panic in finance and accounting in the City of London, but that's their nerves have been calmed a bit, and that market's slowly come back. So it's not as if the market has grown substantially if you track it back over a longer period. If you look at the placements, which we also track, that's actually a better picture. So what seems to be happening is that staffing firms are doing better. They're doing more with less, effectively. The other big thing in the UK is, of course, the new IR35 regulations, which are going to be coming in April 2020, assuming that the Conservative government lasts until April 2020. Of course, if the party isn't successful with Brexit, there may be an election, Labour could come in, and maybe these rules will come in even faster. So I shouldn't be so assured that you've got until April 2020 to be concerned about this. I'm sure some of you operate in the public sector, so you may have experience of how it's affected clients there. One of our clients is Transport for London, and what they tell us, what they saw was that they basically divided their independent contractor workforce into a third. A third transitioned to become permanent employees, a third stayed as independent contractors, and a third disappeared. They went somewhere else, presumably into the private sector. So, of course, if these laws do get extended into the private sector, the ones that disappeared from the public sector have got nowhere else to run. So unless they're going to retire, then they're going to have to decide to become permanent employees or change their independent contracting arrangements. So that's a quick snapshot of the UK market. So as I said, I wanted to go through looking at what the trends might be more globally. This is our workforce solutions ecosystem. So we came up with this about 3 years ago, and for us it was trying to plot what was happening in this whole ecosystem. So about 20 years ago, the staffing industry was this segment in the middle. Effectively, it was temporary staffing and permanent placement, or place and search, executive search. But since then, the world has got a lot more complicated. So you'll be aware that there are many staffing firms that actually invest in some of these other segments. So in process outsourcing, there are many staffing firms that have an RPO business or an MSP business. Some have payrolling businesses. There are some that do outplacement, HR tech. What's interesting is that while it's still easy to define what staffing is, it's actually quite awkward to try and define what a staffing company is, because a staffing company doesn't just do temporary staffing and permanent placement, it seems. They're doing lots of other things. It's quite interesting because it seems there's no common consensus about where the opportunities are. Because if you look at where investments are being made, there are some staffing firms that think they should own a VMS. Some think it's a waste of time owning your VMS. Some think you should own a job board. Some think it's crazy to own a job board and don't touch it. So there's all different perspectives of what's happening in the market and where to invest. And what we're seeing is a sort of turf war expanding out of that circle into some of these other complementary sectors. I'll talk about this sector at the bottom a little bit later in the presentation because it's probably the most interesting part. It's where all the interesting technology is. So I'm going to save that until a little bit later in the presentation. So a turf war across this whole ecosystem of as staffing firms look to diversify and get involved in other types of service. What's interesting is that they're not getting things all their own way because there are a number of other people coming into this market. Xerox and IBM have long been established in this ecosystem. They've been providing services in this ecosystem for a while. Some of these other firms, however, they recently entered this ecosystem. Microsoft is investment in LinkedIn and GitHub, which is IT training business. Google, of course, have announced Google for Jobs and some other investments. Bain owns an MSP called MSX. ADP owns Work Market. IKEA, who'd have thought a furniture company would actually be operating in this particular environment. And Coca-Cola, Wanolo was actually created within Coca-Cola to help their own contingent workforce, and it's now an independent business, a freelance platform. For a number of years, people have been wondering, because of all these new threats to this ecosystem, who is going to be the Uber of this ecosystem? Well, we found out a couple of weeks ago it's a company called Uber, because it was announced that Uber was going to be investing in their own freelance platform. So there's an initiative, allegedly, they haven't confirmed this, but there is an initiative taking place in the US. It seems to be within the catering sector. But what we do know is that Uber is a pretty serious company. They are one of our clients. We don't have any insight into what they're doing in this respect. But if they do enter this market, you can believe that they're going to enter the market quite seriously. They're supposed to be going for a public listing next year. And what they're trying to do is diversify away from just their straightforward taxi business into other areas to make their business more attractive to investors. So this could be the most significant news about the industry this year if it does turn out to be true. The other sort of trend that we plot, obviously, is the whole MSP, VMS, RPO story. Life used to be simpler in the past. Now there's all these intermediaries that are available. Clients can choose lots of different intermediaries. Staffing firms aren't the only way of sourcing labour these days. They can go to crowdsourcing firms. They can go to online staffing platforms. They can outsource their business. We look at MSP quite closely, and we've just published our report on MSP growth for 2017. As you can see, it's growing annually at about 12%. It's growing it's mostly in the US still. MSP in Europe is much smaller, growing a little bit faster than the US. Most of this is probably in the UK, I would say. And we are not expecting the European numbers actually get to the US levels. There are many reasons, structural reasons, not least of the fact because margins are already quite narrow in the continental European markets and the UK market. It's unlikely that MSP will ever grow to the same extent it is in the US. But it is still growing, still a feature of this market. It's growing faster than the staffing market overall, which suggests that it's gaining in penetration in Europe. And I want to say a bit more about the human cloud as we define it. We have lots of fun definitions. One document I'd recommend, we do have a global lexicon. If you go onto our website, you can find a link to the lexicon, which gives all the definitions. As Anne said, I've been in this industry for 25 years, but I still rely on that to try and make sure I understand exactly what all the different terminology refers to. So for us, the human cloud is in three parts. It's online staffing, crowdsourcing, and online services. Online services, the most obvious example would be Uber. So you're paying for a service outcome rather than a labour outcome. There's crowdsourcing where you can say you want a new logo developed and you put out a request for people to design your logo. 100 people design a logo. You just pay the one that you like, and 99 people have wasted their time. Or there's online staffing via the likes of Upwork or freelance.com, other sorts of companies. And that, I think, is the most interesting part of the human cloud for us because it's most closely related to staffing. We deliberately called it online staffing because we felt that it wasn't that much different to offline staffing. At the end of the day, you've got somebody that wants work, you've got a company that needs work done, and you've got an intermediary in the middle, whether that's a staffing company with bricks and mortar or whether it's a technology platform, there's still an intermediary there. And I think that was quite a smart move for us to do that because it does seem that there is a bit of a convergence going on. So at the moment, we've still got this pure online marketplace, Upwork, Freelancer.com, Fiverr, another big US company. Then you've got the traditional staffing providers over here. There are some interesting hybrids we see in the market. The first one that we saw was Coupal, was that a Swiss company that does operate over here in the UK. They're in the catering space. If you want somebody to work in a bar tonight to do a 3-hour shift, you can put that request on your phone. The first person that responds to say they can do it gets the job. They turn up. Their phone acts as the timesheet because by geo-tracking they can tell that they're actually on site. Everything is automated. It's very simple, low-cost business, but they're getting the same sort of margins in Switzerland that APSCo are getting through their staffing business. Not surprisingly, a number of other companies are looking to do this. So these are providing temporary agency workers. These are not providing temporary agency workers. They're providing freelancers. They're not taking responsibility for tax or other social charges. These are mostly providing temporary agency workers, interestingly. So they're getting all the technology efficiencies of these guys, but they're providing temporary agency workers. Not surprisingly, what we've seen is that a number of the agencies have started to invest in their own businesses. So APSCo created its own Adia brand, which for those who've been in the industry for a while was quite amusing because that's what APSCo used to be called. It's now being resurrected as a new modern online brand. They invested in a business called YOS as well. Other companies have invested in these initiatives. Trueblue is the biggest industrial staffing firm in the US. They've got their own initiative called JobStack, which is growing very successfully. But it's not all one-way traffic because what's also happening is some of these freelance platforms are also adding people and consulting services to their pure automated services. So Upwork provides Upwork Pro and Upwork Enterprise. Fiverr does Fiverr Pro as well. So it's all starting to get a little bit murky as to what a staffing company is and what an online staffing company might be. And I think that's going to continue. It sort of reminds me, I worked in the staffing industry when the internet first appeared. And I became a director of e-business, which at the time was a really sexy title. I could turn up at a party and say, I'm in e-business. Of course, after a period of time, everybody realised that e-business was just business. The E was completely unnecessary. And I think that's essentially what we'll find with this online staffing area, is that it's all just going to become staffing. Interestingly, for those of you that weren't aware of this and may be tempted to take advantage of the technology that can do that, there are a number of technologies that enable you to do it. So you haven't got to go away and build this yourself. These companies all provide white label solutions to enable you to build your own online staffing brand. TempBuddy is probably the better known one here. It's an Irish firm which operates in the European market. Of course, any discussion talking about the future cannot ignore the impact of technology, and the scary thing is that there's just so much of it around. So any one of these things has got the potential to impact your business considerably. It could impact the way you do your business, but of course it can impact the people that you're supplying to clients as well. So you will have seen there's a lot of comment about automation, how it's going to impact different sectors. We look at all those reports, and I've just taken a few snapshots from some of the ones that we think are pretty good. This was a recent one from PwC. They are saying that there's sort of 3 waves of automation. We're in wave 1 at the moment, which is this orange bar here. So that's going to last until the 2020s. You can see we haven't really experienced the full level of automation yet. That's really going to come in wave 2, which is going to be over the next decade, really. If you look at the sectors that are most impacted, I mentioned finance and accounting is not a particularly good sector to be in. And maybe that's one of the reasons why. If you look at the jobs that are most at threat from automation, it isn't necessarily the low-skilled jobs. It is actually accounting roles. Any accountants in the audience? Must be some.
Thanks for that, John.
Yeah. So you'll be long retired before it hits you. Actually, I understand if you're in a managerial role already, then it won't impact you because apparently the sort of social skills that you need as a manager are not easily replaced by a robot. Not yet, anyway. The other report I'd recommend, the Future of Skills report by the Oxford Martin School. The Oxford Martin School were actually the first guys that raised awareness about automation of the workforce. They did this about 8 years ago, and it was when he first started to read about the fact that robots were going to be taking over all our jobs. Because they came up with an assessment that 47% of all US jobs were susceptible to automation over the next 10 years. They've since refined that analysis, and other people have refined it further as well. But their latest report, they basically published this, and this is just one small part of it, but as you can say, we mostly don't know what's going to happen, how it's going to impact jobs. There will certainly be occupations that will shrink. There will be new occupations to take advantage of, but we mostly still don't know what's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of change. It seems like the likely outcome will be that jobs won't go, but they'll be significantly changed. The problem there is, of course, are we confident in the training and education systems that we have to help educate people to take on these new jobs, especially when they seem to be failing us given the current level of skills that are required in the market. I said I'd speak about the technology piece, and so this gives you a bit more insight into it because there's a lot that's going on here. So we break it down into 5 different areas. So under candidate discovery, we've got online job advertising, which includes old-fashioned job boards, but old-fashioned job boards are now joined by a bunch of other new, exciting providers. It seems to me, from my experiences, that staffing firms quite often look down on job boards. The job board industry is growing faster than the staffing industry at the moment. There's a lot of interesting things happening in there. Programmatic job ads, for example. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but programmatic advertising is when you go onto a website, you look at a pair of shoes, you don't buy it, and then 2 days later you're on another website, and by magic that pair of shoes is being advertised. You can do that with jobs now as well. Then under systems of record, we've got applicant tracking systems, VMS, workforce analytics, candidate assessment, psychometric assessments. Under candidate engagement, all sorts of things, recruitment chatbots, engagement platforms, background check verifications, social media screening, etc. So there's lots happening. And of course, what's really happening is that things are being assisted because of developments in artificial intelligence, big data. So there are tools that are available today that 5 years ago you wouldn't have thought you needed, and that just didn't exist. So workforce analytics is now a whole different level to what it used to be. Intelligent sourcing management systems where you can use technology to just go out and search for people all the time. Any vacancy within your company, it will just automatically go out and find people on social media sites and other places to recommend. It will initially engage with those candidates on your behalf before you have to start getting people involved in the process as well. Recruitment chatbots is one of the most interesting ones because if we look at what's been happening this year in particular, I would say it's probably been the year of the chatbot. Maya is an investment. Adecco made a significant investment in Maya. Randstad has built their own chatbot, which I understand is called Randy. So well done for the marketing team at Randstad for that. Randstad also interestingly invested in an initiative called Wade and Wendy. What's particularly interesting about them is that Wade is a chatbot which will help the job seeker like all these other chatbots. So the initial engagement with the job seeker. Staffing companies like employers are normally pretty poor dealing with the candidates that are of no use to them. You're very good at looking after the candidates you can make money from. Those that you can't, you probably don't follow up with them, which doesn't really help the reputation of the staffing industry. The advantage of chatbots is that there's an automated way for you to engage with candidates. The ones that you've not used, you can go back in a year's time and the chatbot will just automatically start up a conversation with them. Maybe you've got a position for them then. So Wade acts like that. Wendy is a chatbot that acts for the job seeker, because any serious job seeker is sending out loads and loads of job applications. So it helps administer all that complex work for the job seeker. So the initial job engagement in the future could end up being one chatbot talking to another chatbot before the humans actually start getting involved in the process. So whether or not that is what the future will actually look like, I don't know, but certainly the technology is there to do it. We do a survey of staffing firms here in Europe and in North America as well. This is the European results. And we basically ask staffing firms, what is it you're automating at the moment? And what is it that people are mostly doing? So you can see there's a whole spectrum here. It seems like these are the functions that candidates can do. So candidates will submit their resumes without a person getting involved in it, viewing jobs, obviously applying for jobs. And the scale goes down here. What we're assuming is going to happen, because we're going to be tracking this over time, is that things are going to shift along this line. Now, I think when we're thinking about the future of staffing firms, this is probably the biggest challenge you have. Because, as I said, there's lots of interesting technology for you to use that allow you to automate your business, make you more efficient, faster, cheaper. But how far should you go? Because at heart, we know the staffing industry is a people business. So how much are you going to continue having your consultants do stuff compared to what you're going to automate? I would suggest that some companies are going to get the balance right, some are going to go too far, and some aren't going to go far enough. We do the same analysis looking at the functions that you allow your clients to do as well. Interestingly, it seems like you allow your clients to do less automatically than you do candidates, which I'm not quite sure is the right balance. But it seems like you want to keep closer to your candidates than to your clients than you do to candidates. There's a lot of talk about automation, and we put on lots of events, and people mostly want to talk about technology. But when we ask staffing firms what concerns them the most, actually, you don't spend most of your nights worrying about technology. You spend most of your nights worrying about getting access to staff. It's skill shortages that are the big things that keep you awake at night. This is from Manpower's survey. They do a really good analysis of where they see skill shortages. You may be reassured that actually the UK market is at the moment not one of the markets that face the most difficulty. There are other countries where it's much more difficult to find skilled talent. I think in general, skill shortages are actually a good thing, even though they feel difficult and it's you just can't find the candidates. But it's much better than the other way around. At least you've got candidates. If things are in short supply, you should be able to charge more for them if you can find them. I guess the thing is just finding them in the first place. So skill shortages are a big issue. If you look at how that plays out on a more global perspective, you can see Europe here. Population decline, markets, particularly Germany, Southern Europe, suffering more so than the UK, but the UK isn't great. The US is a little bit better, but even their workforce participation rates begin to slow down. And the US economy, of course, has been the global engine for growth, but they are not getting the same number of people working in their country, especially if they're building walls to prevent people from getting into the country as well. But if you look at this picture, you can see actually, it's not like there's a shortage of workers. There are plenty of workers. They're just all in the wrong place. So it's interesting at the moment that we live in a world where countries want to put up barriers for getting access to workers, whereas in fact business would benefit from being able to tap into international talent. And with that message, I'll leave you there.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh. I shouldn't stop without the important marketing slides at the end. You may be aware that we put on events as well. We've got a major conference coming up next week in London, so I believe you can still buy a ticket. So I know a number of you in the room are attending that event, but we'll be having a 2-day conference talking about all the issues that I've quickly gone through today. And also, I wanted to plug this. We do a best staffing firms to work for competition. Although the big advantage for taking part in it is this bullet point at the bottom. It's free to take part, and you get an employee engagement report, because the way that we judge whether you're a good staffing firm or not is that we will actually send a survey out to all your employees, to your temporary workers, and you'll get a free report from us. So even if you don't win, you'll get a strong benefit from taking part. Okay,
Thank you. Thanks again. I would just like to say something, and I'm not on commission for this or anything actually, but the executive forum arranged by the Staffing Industry House is without question the premier event in the recruitment market. The American one is amazing, the European one held here, and it is next week. It is a really good event. If you're looking to attend something, that's the one to go to. It just is. I'm involved in that, in a debate actually about whether, and I'm the weak link, I suspect, in that couple of day event, but in an event where we're looking at a debate about whether artificial intelligence is going to take at least 50% of the jobs from the recruitment market. I've been given a very nice French guy who doesn't speak much English as my debating partner on my side. I feel that wasn't good, although the accent works. The women will vote for him, whatever happens. And on the other side, so we're saying that there will be more than 50% of the recruitment market still employed from a UK point of view after 2030, I think it is. Yeah. So I strongly believe that. But it seems that the other side strongly believe that we have no chance whatsoever of winning, even with the French accent of my colleague. But it's a good event. You should look at being there. And if you do want information about whether you're a good recruitment organisation to be working for, and whether your contracts or temps, whatever, love you, then that's got to be worthwhile doing. Why don't I move on to the next slide? Let's get John Chaplin up here to give us a view of what the budget means to us. And I think that that's going to be useful stuff, because we're not sure, are we? Why don't you come up? Thanks, Greg.
Thanks, Anne.
Well,
Righty-ho. So, I've learnt many things from John's session. The two ones that are going to stick in my mind are that I better retire before I lose my job. And the second one is that if he thinks that accountants can't be replaced by robots, John has clearly not met many accountants in his life. Yes, anyway, well, moving rapidly on before I insult my industry even more. So, I'm going to concentrate on IR35. Why? Because, do you know what, that's the biggest thing for the sector over the next 12 months and beyond. There's lots of stuff in the budget, nothing really greatly sexy or important. There's a few things about VAT recharges, there's some changes around entrepreneur relief and all that type of thing. Do you know what, if you don't know about it now, let me know and I'm happily ping you on details separately to today. The biggest thing I think, and it's entitled The Key Challenge, is IR35. What I'm going to try and do, and hopefully succeed, is to give you the client's perspective. Drawn from lots of conversations, lots of work we're already doing with clients at the moment to try and establish what their problems are, what their concerns are, and what their initial thinking is in terms of how they're going to fix it. And I could put loads of graphs up to explain all of this. I'm going to try and keep it simple because it's hellish confusing. And I think if you take nothing away from this session, it's engage with your clients, because the agencies and the MSPs that will be ahead of the game are the ones that will have those detailed discussions with their clients. The clients are looking for that. The ones that aren't probably need you to have those conversations with them, because they'll be putting things in which might not work for them or indeed you necessarily. Okay, so let's have a look at some good news for a start. I should say, by the way, you'll have in your pack a little brochure which will set this out in a bit more detail. And it'll also have some nice little graphics So feel free to use that and abuse it as you will. And that should explain a little bit more about the background in terms of what I'm going to talk about. So the good news is that it's not April 2019. And you've got till 6th of April 2020 to speak to your clients and put in whatever processes need to be put in place to deal with the changes in IR35. Is it likely to get kicked into the long grass? No. Even if you have a change in government, it's not going to go away, I don't think, because there's quite a lot of tax at stake, and in government, in the corridors of power, what they're seeing is a leakage of tax. So tax, it's not an additional tax, it's a tax that ought to have been paid and should have been paid for the best part of 20 years now. So they're looking at trying to sell it in a slightly different way. So it is good news in that way, but don't sit back on your laurels, because although April 2020 seems a long way away, trust me, it'll be here before you know about it. And the changes for your average client will need to be quite significant and will take, in my estimation, something at least about 12 months, if not longer. In fact, we're already speaking to some clients now, some household name clients, who are looking to put these changes in from April 19. Not because they're going to start taxing people in a different way from April 19, but they recognise that the people that they will have on their books in April 19 will be the same people that they'll still have in April 20. The record I've got so far is, in fact, actually, it's the same entity I'm thinking of. They've got a contract that's been on their books for 29 years, having previously been an employee. So I'm fairly sure I know what the IR35 answer is on that one. Yeah, I'm a bit on the fence, but I'm fairly sure that they'll have to do something different with that person. And when asked whether or not they would be caught by IR35, I said IR35 is the least of your worries. What about worker rights? What about pension rights? What about termination rights, etc. Anyway, so the bad news, two pieces of bad news, is it's going to be a consultation again. At some point in the next few months, which will feed into Finance Bill 2019. What does that mean is we don't know some of the finer points. So you're going to have to plan for things not knowing all of the details. I'll try and give you some heads up now as to what I think the details are going to be, but just bear in mind you're going to need to have enough flexibility to be a little bit agile in terms of how you have that debate with clients. Second one is, unlike many changes to tax law, there is no win-win out of this. Your clients, if they are not on top of it, will think that you will be able to fix this problem for them. There is no win-win scenario. There are two outcomes on this. One is the client will have to manage a significant amount of risk that they don't have to manage now, i.e. why are they not deducting tax? Or two is they will have to account for tax, so therefore the costs will go up, or the slice of the pie that's been taken away for tax will have to come out of the financial dealings that the transaction will have. So in other words, somebody will have to pay that cost because HMRC are grabbing that element of tax. So there is no win-win. And if anybody is at any point telling you that there is a solution for this that keeps the costs at the same amount and doesn't significantly increase somebody's risk, they're deluded. Okay? Sorry to sound on a bad note, but let's just keep that in your mind as you go along. So here's what we're going to look at. Some of them briefly, some of them in a little bit more detail. What we know, what we don't know, what the options open to clients are, and that's drawn from what we've been doing in the public sector, what we're already doing in the private sector, and what our clients are telling us they'd like to think about. The challenges that are going to come along as a result of those options, the pros and cons, if I can put it that way. What the clients are thinking about doing and how you can help. So bad scenario is they do it in isolation, or they rely on you 100% to fix their problem. A good scenario is you work in collaboration to get that fix in and in plenty of time to make it seamless. And then we'll have a look at what the public sector did and in some cases didn't do. So the key message there will be don't repeat their errors. They had a lot less time to fix it, if I'm being honest. You've got more time. And then just have a look at some technology, because it wouldn't be any session if we didn't look at technology in terms of how that can help support it. Okay, Now, apologies because I think the formatting's changed slightly on the slide, so hopefully you can see those. But I think most of the graphs and the like are in the packs if you need to have a look at them. Anyway, this is a reminder of what the problem is, if I can put it that way. So currently, if you have a contractor, it's the contracting company's problem in the private sector as to whether or not IR35 applies. So, and just to put some numbers on that, HMRC think that 1 in 3 contractors in the UK should be operating under IR35. Of that 1 in 3, 1 in 10 do. So it's this third again, isn't it? So a third of all contractors in the UK should have PAYE and NIC deducted as deemed employees. Of that, 3%. So the size of the problem is about 30% of the UK personal service company market. Don't run away with, therefore, then a third of yours will cause you difficulties, because it will be different sectors, will be different answers and what have you. On average, there is no 30%. When we've been speaking to clients, when we've looked at the public sector, it tends to fall into 2 buckets. Broadly, 10% of the contractors are caught by IR35, or broadly, 10% aren't caught by IR35. It's those 2 extremes. There is very rarely an average 30%. The problem is going to be is that from April 20, that assessment, that IR35 decision will swap from being the contractor's problem to the engager, your clients in the typical scenario. So there's 2 definitions. Engager, that's the person who uses the services ultimately of the contractor. A fee payer, that's the entity that pays that contractor's business. So if there's an agency involved in the contractual chain, it's going to be the agency, the last agency in the chain. Obviously, if the engager pays them direct, then the engager is both the engager and the fee payer, in which case they're not your problem. But yeah, that's not a solution, I hasten to add. That's the size of the issue. And HMRC have said there's £1.3 billion worth of tax at stake. I think they've undercut that significantly. I don't know, I can't give you any scientific evidence, but some basic back of the fag packet maths say that if you take a third of the population that are working on a contract basis currently, and then take some average tax rates, etc., you're going to get up with a much bigger figure than that. Even if that's the right one, you've got to get the right 1/3. So in the public sector, we saw that it was the wrong people that were getting taxed. There are still people who are not having PAYE deducted from them, who should have been having PAYE, and we're in the crosshairs, shall I say, from HMRC perspective. And there's lots of contractors who are having tax deducted when they are still self-employed. They really are outside of IR35, but they've been forced into a situation that they don't like. Okay? So what do we know? Well, in fact, actually looking at that, I think it's got pound signs and it should have euro signs on there. What we've got is, we know that there's going to be a small business exemption. They haven't actually officially said what that small business exemption is going to be yet, but everybody thinks it's going to be Companies Act 2006. If they meet any 2 of the following criteria, then they're a small business. We haven't seen what's going to happen around group structures or anti-avoidance or anything along those lines. But I'm absolutely convinced that there will be people forming limited companies that fall within those exemptions with a view to avoiding IR35. HMRC will be all over that like a rash, and we'll have anti-avoidance coming out the wazoo on it, so just be very wary about that. They're going to consult over the coming months. Finance Bill, summer 19. If HMRC have done anything in the past around IR35, it's miss every deadline they've set. So don't rely too much on that. So in theory, you might not know until autumn 2019 what the actual outcome of this legislation will be. If you wait till then, you'll be too late. So plan for it, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Plan for it now, and then adapt when you know what the final rules are. HMRC has said they won't automatically chase contractors where, if your client decides that they're in IR35 from 2020, they won't look to reopen tax returns for those contractors historically. The key word there is automatically. I'm an ex-tax investigator, and I can tell you without any doubt that if I am out there and I see somebody gone from outside of IR35 into IR35, I will look into their tax returns. If they're the same entity doing the same work in the same terms, why wouldn't I? I might not go automatically to do that, but I'm not going to ignore it either. So be wary, because what we saw in the public sector is that contractors who were afeared of, if I can put it that way, of HMRC's activity jumped ship. So even though they were happy with the IR35 decision that was being made, i.e. they were content that they were within IR35, they'd leave to go to another business in IR35 to have that deadline cut off. So they could then go to HMRC as, well, yeah, I am caught by IR35 now, but I wasn't in my last job, and they haven't got the last job giving an IR35 assessment. So there will be churn, even though everybody in inverted commas is happy with the decision that's being taken. And then HMRC, the CESS tool, the check employment status tool, fantastic. It works perfectly well. There are no glitches in it. It covers every sector. It doesn't need improvement, yet they're improving it. Did I hear laughter? I don't know. So anyway, they will change it. How will they all improve it? We don't know yet. No, they'll probably twiddle around the seams, if I'm being perfectly honest. So it still will not be that fit for purpose. One thing to actually make clear, though, is if somebody's outside of IR35 today, they're going to be outside of IR35 in April 2020. The same tests are there. Employment status, control, mutuality, personal service, all of those, at least for the time being, will stay the same. So don't fall into the we have to put everybody in IR35 just because who's making that decision is changing. The actual tests themselves, the law around it, isn't. Okay? So what we don't know yet, there's likelihood that there's going to be transfer of debt rules coming in. Some of the bigger agencies are getting a little bit fed up with a model that's out there whereby a smaller business will come along, interject themselves between the last agency in the chain and the contractor, and as a result of that say, we are the fee payer. So within the public sector, we saw a lot of NHS contracts where the NHS would say IR35 applies, but the end agency was not operating IR35. So, and the reason for that is that they thought that IR35 doesn't apply, but if HMRC disagree with that, then they're a relatively small business. They fold it and go off and start somewhere else, potentially. So there's lots around potential for transfer of debt rules to be introduced, such that, for example, if at the end client says IR35 is due, it will be responsible on the paying entity to make sure IR35 is deducted. And if they don't do that, then there could be additional transfer of debt rules, which could be quite noticeable. The reasonable care test is that if the end client tells you that they're outside of IR35 and gets that decision wrong, you're liable for that pay as you earn an NIC unless you can show that the client hasn't taken reasonable care in making that decision. And we can have a whole debate as to if you make it a wrong decision, have you taken reasonable care? And I'll leave that to one side at the minute. But you do have to be aware that that could be tweaked. So that you might even find that the liability goes back automatically to the end engager. We should see on that one. You'll also see in the public sector there's lots of blanket decisions being made. Contractors hate blanket decisions. If you've not seen the PR around blanket decisions being overturned and being theoretically illegal payroll deductions, then you just need to Google IR35 and it'll come up with them all over the place. There are already cases being taken and won by the contractors around blanket decisions. So again, you've got to be careful around if you've got 1,000 contractors on your books. In theory, you've got to do 1,000 IR35 assessments, or indeed your client has got to do 1,000 IR35 assessments, and they won't want to do that. They won't be geared up to do it, frankly. But you've got to be careful you don't take unnecessary shortcuts. And what we don't know is what changes are going to be made to the tool, or indeed, probably more important, what guidance will be issued to accompany the tool and the legislation. Chances are that the guidance will be fairly washy and will not actually be of much use. So don't sit like the public sector did to wait for the guidance to be issued by HMRC and the tool to come out and the legislation to be finalised, otherwise you'll be too late. Also, don't forget that contractors are human beings. They have mortgages, they have bills, they have family to look after. Some clients, dare I say, approach contractors as being a different beast to their employees. And they're learning the hard way that's not necessarily a good idea to do. So I think one of the things there is that they're going to have to bear in mind how the contractors will react. I'll give you some numbers in a moment which might set the scene a little bit more. There's also competitors. If you want to tax somebody and somebody else isn't taxing them, the contractor may well jump ship. You've got to be careful that you are not being over compliant, but also you've got to be careful you're not being under compliant. And as yet, we've got views in terms of how HMRC will approach it. I don't think they've got the resources to go after everybody clearly, but they will do the big hits. They will look for names to get out there. They will look for big settlements where corporates and or agencies haven't done what, in HMRC's opinion, they should have done. Okay. So this little diagram sets out the choices open to your average client. So on the left-hand side is the current position. On the right-hand side is the future position from April 2020. So on the left-hand side, it's simple. The contractor has to decide whether or not they're caught by IR35, and if they are, account for PAYE via their self-assessment return. It changes nothing in terms of their invoicing or anything along those lines. Appreciate you probably can't see these slides from the back, so apologies. They are in your packs. However, going forward, the client's got to do two things. Decide, firstly, whether or not that contractor's in IR35 or not. And there's two ways they can be. One is that they're outside of IR35 already and nothing has to change. Great, that's the nirvana. They're outside of IR35 because things have changed. So the contract's been updated, the working conditions have been changed to keep them outside of IR35. Again, not quite nirvana because there's a risk there that decision's wrong, but certainly that's the best outcome, i.e. outside IR35 we can get on with what we're being paid to do. If, however, the IR35 assessment tells them that they're inside of IR35 and nothing can be done to change that, then the client's got one of four choices to make. Option one is they carry on paying them the same rate and then take the hit on the national insurance costs on top of that. So costs to the client go up. And just to put some figures on that, typically that means that their costs will go up by about 13%, but also typically the contractor's take-home pay will go down by about 7%. So you've got a 20% swing for no changes in terms of the commercials. Okay? So you've got not happy client and not happy contractor. Option two is the client says, and we saw quite a chunk of this in the public sector, that the day rates will have to change. So if we're paying, and the maths is easy for me, so bear with me, is if we're paying £500 a day currently, your day rate from April 2020 will be about £450 a day. The £50 will be used to fund the national insurance costs that we've got. So the client pays the £500 top line still, contractors' day rate drops, and they've got the employee national insurance to pay on that. So again, just some round figures, is the client's happy-ish because their costs haven't increased at all, but the contractor's take-home pay has gone down by about 15%. So unhappy contractor. Option three is they're taken on the books as employees, so they get all employment rights, holiday pay, etc., etc. That's quite a costly option, although if the end client is partially exempt from VAT, so financial sector and similar businesses, that might be number-wise a favoured approach because they're not going to then have to pay VAT on that worker. But that's not good for your business because then they are an employee, not a temporary worker. And then option four is the kitchen sink one, which is they're going to keep that person is so key to that entity that they're going to increase their day rate to keep them whole from a net pay perspective. And you can be talking 40, 50% increases in day rates to do that. Clearly the client won't want to do that because then their contracting bill will go through the roof. So that will be selected individuals who are so important to that particular business and cannot be easily replaced. Okay, so they're the choices. As you can see, there is either a risk on one side or a cost on the other. There is no balance, I'm afraid. There is no perfect answer unless the worker is absolutely slam dunk outside of IR35. And I come back to 2/3 of workers in HMRC's view are already outside of IR35. They're perfectly happy with that. You just got to make sure that you can prove it and support that if challenged. Okay. What are the client's key challenges? These are probably 5 biggie things, so bear with me. So some clients are using this now as not an excuse, but they've realised that they've got to look at their workforce strategy. So some clients are saying, right, okay, we're going to move from contractors as a big piece of our business. We're going to put them on as employees, fixed-term contracts, or whatever it may well be. So that's the thing that they've got to look at is their model at the minute one that should remain the same. EY as a firm, for example, we now in our headcount numbers include all contract staff. And the reason for that is so then the hiring decision is not based on whether the headcount number changes or not. Okay? Whereas most companies have a headcount number and that could maybe be the only reason that that person's brought on a contract basis. Next, you'd be surprised, maybe not, is understanding who the hell they pay. The average client, I would say, can point you towards about half of their contract spend easily. The other half, nope, no idea. We think it's about so-and-so, and so therefore what they're having to do is the challenge is finding out how much they pay and who they pay it to and under what circumstances. Then there's operational risk and tax risk. You know, the risk around what happens if these people leave, what happens if we don't pay them what they want, what happens if we do pay them what they want, you know, can we deliver on those projects, will our clients pay the extra amount, etc., etc. And then last but not least is how do we deal with the admin, the practicalities of it, how do we do the IR35 assessments, how do we make sure that in the future we're not storing up liabilities for the past. So, how can you help your clients? Well, funnily enough, the first time that they'll probably reach out to you is to find out how much they spend with you at the minute. So if you have those conversations, that's probably the start of a good excuse to have a conversation with them in terms of why do you want to know, not probably in those quite the same words, but understand what the driver is behind it. They will need to understand how they can cope with this problem because there are potentially massive systems issues. I'll give you an example. Let's say there's an invoice for £1,000 plus VAT and that contractor is caught by IR35. The £1,000 will have to go through payroll. The £200 VAT will get paid to the contractor. Let's say the £1,000 on payroll comes out at £600 net. The £600 then will have to be paid through the accounts payable system to the contractor, the contracting company, and the £400 have to go through payroll to HMRC. So you have to have a system that deducts pay as you earn off an accounts payable invoice, but accounts for VAT on the top invoice price, not the actual amount that's being paid. You can imagine most client systems going to meltdown at the thought of paying VAT at anything other than 20% of the amount that's going over. They'll want you to understand how you can help them simplify their contractor base. So what I mean by that is trying to understand what buckets they're in, high risk, low risk, medium risk, and what you can do about that to get more information in terms of how they work. They'll want help in terms of can you do any individual or blanket IR35 assessments. Some clients will expect you to solve that problem for them. Others, the opposite end of the scale, will tell you that that's the answer based on perhaps not all of the facts. What else? Just a couple of other things there is you do need, and the clients will definitely need to understand what the churn's going to be. So they don't know yet, and nobody does know yet, what the human reaction is going to be. In the private sector, there was, I think John mentioned, a third. Who knows? In the public sector. In the private sector, I genuinely don't know. It will be, different sectors will have different attitudes. So some, and I've got one building society who said, we're going to tax everybody under PAYE, and if they don't like it, they can go elsewhere. Another bank is saying we can't do that because we've got critical IT contracts that we have to deliver on. If we don't deliver on those, we're going to fall over and the regulator's going to be all over us. I don't know. But I think the key thing is definitely early decisions. What are clients doing now? Most, I think, are in the understanding stage, moving into the planning stage. So that's the understanding various things like what they spend, how many contractors they've got, what their internal decisions and stakeholders would like them to do, what their external stakeholders want them to do, just trying to figure out what the problem is. So you may be able to help them understand at least some of the numbers behind that. Then, if they haven't already, shortly they're going to have to move into the planning stage. And that's going to be, for example, one fix in inverted commas is statement of work. So let's move everybody from a time and materials contract onto a statement of work. If they truly can move to a deliverable project, an outcomes-based contract, that's outside of IR35. However, massive warning. Don't assume that that's the be-all and end-all of it. Calling it a statement of work does not a statement of work make. Okay? So just be wary if either your clients are telling you that that's how they want to contract with you in the future, because then, well, who's responsible for the outcome? Is it the contractor or is it the agency that's signed that contract? So what happens when you put a contractor in a bank and they press a button and it causes the next financial crisis? Who's liable for that? You, them, the bank? I don't know, statement of work, change the legal position on that one quite significantly. They'll also want to start thinking as to which of those four options I mentioned they're going to fall into. It's not mutually exclusive, it's not all in one or all in another. There'll probably be a mixture throughout the piece. And then they'll start planning in terms of what changes they're going to make and what's going to happen over the next 16, 17 months or so. Some mistakes in the public sector. I mentioned a couple of these already. I won't go through many of these in any detail, but just watch out for the blanket decisions and the assumption that the contractors are going to be happy with the decision that's made. They won't be in Maine, unless you're telling them they're outside of IR35. And then they will be very happy, particularly if you've put that in writing. But you'll definitely need to help your clients. I think this is sort of a joint working relationship. Actually, I think it's a chance for you to get close to your clients and to help them through a difficult period for them. They'll be looking for that help, and those that aren't are probably going to make mistakes. So to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem would be my honest answer on that one. Okay. Technology, 3 pieces of technology that I would suggest most clients will at some point consider as to whether they're going to use them or not. One is the modelling. So we have a piece of technology which does the calculations as to what the impact on each of those 4 options will be. They will need to do some sort of calculation because the reason, the genesis behind that tool was clients were deciding before they knew what it was going to cost them. And then as soon as they knew what it was going to cost them, the decision was changed. So you will need to help them in terms of okay, if you do that, that's what the cost is going to be, or that's what the impact of the contract is going to be. There are online assessment tools. We've got one in development. It will be ready shortly, but there are other ones. There are good, bad IR35 assessment tools, like anything. Good includes a proper consideration of the facts by the end client, by the contractor, probably even by yourselves as well. It includes a review of the contracts and a review of the working conditions. It is not a tool whereby somebody goes in with a wish list, typically a contractor who wants to prove that they're outside of IR35. In this example, employment law is not binary. It is not a yes, no. You can't sort of add up, if you've got 10 questions and 7 of them point towards being outside of IR35, that means that IR35 doesn't apply. The 3 that cause them to be in IR35, you could have just one of those, and that could be the slam dunk one way or another. So I'm afraid, when you start looking in terms of how HMRC's tool works, it's not really as good as they make it out to be, I'm afraid. And maybe the bigger clients, I accept that, but they are definitely looking at strategic workforce planning tools and all the things that John's mentioned. This may well be the trigger for them looking entirely at changing their model in terms of contractors. And some are already doing that and thinking, well, do you know what, if we're going to increase our cost by X% anyway, if we're going to tax them as employees, why don't we just look at them as being employees, and let's have a look at that being our model going forward. So be wary of that. Okay, so I'll shut up. Somebody once told me that the best way was to stand up, speak up, and then shut up. Hopefully I've done the first two. I'll do the last one now. Act now. Speak to your clients. Do not wait until after Christmas. Okay? I'm afraid Christmas is a lovely time of the year, but it's not the one to ignore IR35 at the moment. Make sure you speak to all the stakeholders. Help them consider the wider strategy. It isn't just tax. In fact, actually, this is a tax problem that's going to be cured by procurement, talent, HR, commercial, etc. So if clients are looking at this as a tax problem, then they're already missing the point. And then last but not least, it's going to take time, so the sooner you start, you're going to be ahead of the curve. Okay, thank you very much.
Whoa, thanks, John, for that. Obviously, I go to a number of things with regard to IR35. You may not know, but in 1999, APSCo, the forerunner of APSCo, was founded specifically to make sure that the government of that time didn't screw all of us over on daft IR35 stuff. We didn't totally succeed by getting rid of it, but the debt transfer provision was in the original plans for IR35, and APSCo got rid of that. But that's why we were formed 19 years ago now. It's quite a long period of time. APSCo chair HMRC's working party on looking at how to bring this into practice and how to make sure that it's not as bad as it might be. But the reality is this is big ticket stuff, and it will change the nature of the way that we work with customers. I agree with John that I think there is a real opportunity for us to be working in partnership and educate our customers. APSCo for its members, and actually if you're not a member but you want a copy of this, ask me and I'll get it sorted for you. We'll be sending out guidelines on the conversations you need to have with customers and a checklist on what you need to do, and we are in full agreement with John with regard to this. Do it before Christmas and the conversations will continue. It's not something you can put off, and it's not something you can watch and see what the big companies are doing so that you don't need to. So I think it's an opportunity to show that we know what we're talking about on it. Why don't I get, we're finishing at 12:30, so why don't I get our panel here on the table? Can I ask the two Johns to come and sit down? And then can I also ask Andrew Fahey, who's the Managing Director of Brookson's, so that you know Brookson's have been an APSCo member forever. Actually, a great APSCo member. And the other thing that perhaps wasn't mentioned so far from an IR35 point of view is that if a financial advisory, umbrella, whatever we want to call this organisation, starts telling you that they can sort all your problems and your contractors don't need to pay very much tax because they've got a brand new scheme, those are generally not the ones that you're going to be utilising, okay? And what I would push very heavily is APSCo put all of those companies that have affiliate membership with APSCo through a pretty heavy-duty test to make sure they are compliant and appropriate to be wearing an APSCo badge. It's heavy, it really is heavy duty. Even if you're not an APSCo member, you can see the list of those affiliated businesses on our website. I wouldn't touch anybody who's on that because it's not safe. So be very careful who you choose. It doesn't cost you anything to have extra checks, and then you might want a beauty parade of which one, but you should choose a company such as Brookson's to do that work on your behalf. So Andrew's got 15 years experience in the flexible workforce, been at Brookson's forever, I know that. And actually oversees all the key NHS trust staff, the recruitment market, the client relationships involved in supporting the rollout and management of PSLs, VMS and product development. Brookson's are ahead of the game from a lot of those companies in looking at the future of the way that they serve the recruitment market. So well done. James Twining is CEO at Kingsbridge. I think he may well have been here anyway. Tom, any news on the Tom and Dolly scenario, Steve? Oh. Sorry? He's now a dad. Boy, girl? Oh my God, okay. So we've had an R for Tom and Dolly, but that also means that Steve is a grandpa, so I think we should give him a round of applause. Everyone okay? Good. Okay, great. Yeah. That's definitely made my day. And so formerly the group commercial director, actually, James is now the CEO. Tom is the MD of that business. Steve, your role is more of a chairman role nowadays. Sort of. Okay, head guru and demigod, I think we can say, and grandpa. And can all the members of the staff call you grandpa from now on? Yeah. Lovely. James was an investment banker at UBS before co-founding it and then getting involved in a software business, so he knows his stuff with regard to this too. Why don't we? Look, I've got some questions that I can fill in if everyone's a bit too shy. But why don't we open this to the floor and see if we've got any questions from a really interesting, and you can tell already, knowledgeable panel. Go for it. Hands up.
Hi, can I kick off? I was really keen on your SOW point, because we're hearing a lot of clients that are trying to push us down the let's go SOW.
Yeah.
Have you got any advice on what the parameters of whether it's legitimate SOW work, how we sort of navigate those conversations?
Okay, so you've got to be careful. It does work, but it can also be risky. I'm going to put that caveat up front. An SOW one is, in an ideal world, is there is a fixed deliverable for a fixed price to probably a fixed timing. So I do SOW work all the time. So I have to estimate number of staff, how long it's going to take, and then we have pricing for each of those particular levels of staff that we use. The client will probably prefer to know who the team is that's delivering that, but will have ultimately no say. So if I want to send Wendy instead of Bill, then that's up to us, because we have contracted for the delivery of a service, not the supply of a person. Now, I appreciate contracting in the real world probably doesn't quite work like that, but you certainly have to have quite a few of those badges, if I can put it that way, in place for it to be an SOW. If all you're doing is, in that example, still supplying Bill, and it's you're going to need Bill for 100 days, and so the fee is 100 times a day rate, and you've interviewed Bill, and Bill is the only one, and there is nothing in terms of any substitution, and the output is you carry on working until we stop telling you working, and that's not an SOW. That's probably the two extremes. Real life would be somewhere in the middle, and you've got to get it to the first scenario and not the last one.
John, can I get you involved in this? Because I know that the staffing insurance have quite a lot involved from the state side, I suppose, with statement of work contracts. Are we finding recruitment companies are wandering into a danger zone here?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, we of course it's nothing new. There are plenty of staffing firms in the past that have thought we set up a little consulting business. It's nice and complementary to what we do, especially in IT staffing, for instance. But as John mentioned, there's risk involved. It's a different sort of business, so it's certainly not a step that you can take lightly. You've got to make sure that you've got the resources and the internal people that can manage that, because it's a different sort of business to a staffing business.
Yeah, be very careful. Either of our other panel members, did you want to say something on that?
We're certainly seeing a number of contractors extremely interested in statements of work, again thinking it's the nirvana solution to being the answer to remain outside of IR35. I guess in our experience, so statements of work potentially have to have financial risk associated to them as well. So when we've spoken to contractors, are they willing to take that? Verbally the answer is no, which is back to John's point in that it has to pass the duck test almost as well to be a statement of work.
I should add, we have a training course on statement of work in London.
Let's flog that training course. Okay, Ken, do you have a view? Do you have a view with regard to statement of work?
Well, just that, I guess, as John was saying.
Can you speak loud?
Yeah,
because
sorry.
It's
there's going to be multiple different solutions, I think, required, and that's one of the answers to be required. So you've got to have that in the armoury, but you've got to deal with everything on a test case. And I think this is probably the slight issue, is that you can't take an approach and just stick everyone in one bucket. You've got to look at every single case, and that puts a huge burden back onto you ultimately, or to your clients if they choose to do it themselves, or for you to partner with someone who can do that for you. And that may well be a valid answer for some, but not everyone.
Yeah, look, we need to be really careful. So a company like McGregor Moyle in that IT market, the city, whatever, it's easy to think that all of a sudden we're a software company and that we can put people in and fixed term stuff and actually gauge how much that should be costing ahead of game. It's a danger zone. It's not saying don't do it, but don't think it's easy. You might need different people to really do real risk analysis on every time you're pitching for something, because a cock-up on that can be very, very expensive. Just be careful. Okay, another question. Good question. Yes?
Just related to SOW, a number of organisations we're speaking to are really concerned about the fact that they have multiple statement of work contracts in place, but really it's been approached for headcount. So it's where they haven't had the budget for continuing resource, so they've kind of pushed it into the statement of work contracts. What should they be doing now in order to address that?
Yeah, good question. John Chaplin, I'm going to come to you. Do you have a view of what the end user customers should be doing, having pushed things into statement of work so they avoid that headcount scenario?
So I think firstly is they have to be honest with themselves in terms of the population that are part of the consideration. So it's not entirely different to what we were talking about a moment ago. It's looking at who is actually in scope, and just because it's been fudged as an SOW in the past, IR35's come along and perhaps made it more front and central, but actually all it's done is added another risk to probably what the risks they're already taking are anyway. So I think you've got to have those conversations and bring them in and look. It may well be that those workers are already outside of IR35 in terms of how they deliver those services anyway, but just putting them on an SOW has two risks. One is it might not be an SOW legally, and two is even if it is, do you want to commercially take the risk that having that sort of contract has?
And I think from a client perspective as well, one of the things that we're doing, and John referenced it earlier on, is rather than going in at the detail level and engaging just on statements of work, to encourage the clients to do the complete audit of their entire flexible workforce, understand where everybody is, how they're structured, and once they can see the full risk profile, then you're able to have a far more informed discussion than just getting crocodile rolled into the, well, let's get a statement of work.
Yeah. I mean, my response would be is that what they should be doing is what they should have done in the first place, is make sure that the workers are properly classified. I mean, we certainly see, one of the reasons we have a training course on an SOW, because a lot of the people who are our clients provide MSP. And what happens, of course, you put the MSP and the VMS in place and you get control of that agency work spend. But then what happens is that the line managers, because they can't go out and get a temporary agency worker, go and get a consultant to do the job. So you think you're saving on your temporary work, but in fact you're spending more on consulting fees. So there's certainly a lot of interest from the client side in just trying to control all contingent work spend. So I think that's a positive trend, and it's something that's going to continue.
The reality is, again, it's an opportunity for us to be telling our customers things that we perhaps haven't been saying. We need to know what we're doing, but to go in and with some of our clients actually provide that kind of audit of what they're doing. Of course, people should have been, customers should be doing that anyway. More people are starting to look at total talent management within their businesses. But if it's smaller companies or badly organised companies, it's an opportunity for us to sell ourselves into there and go and do that audit with them on their behalf in order for them to have a real look at what they're doing. I think that's a good opportunity for good recruitment companies who can manage to provide that kind of service. Let's have another hand up for a question. We've got loads. I thought we might be short.
In a typical agency hiring engagement where you may have the engager, the client, the MSP, the agency, and the PSC, or maybe an umbrella, and it's classified as an IR35 engagement, which agent is responsible in that chain for deducting the NICs and tax?
It's probably a question for you more than me.
Yeah, it's a question for
It's the last one before the personal service company. So so it's the one at the bottom of the chain, if I can put it that way. So it's not the MSP, it's the agency below them, or indeed the agency below them if it's been subcontracted. It's the one who physically makes the payments to the contracting company.
So if there was an umbrella in between, then it would be the umbrella company that would
Right.
be responsible.
So bear with me, because it depends on what you mean by umbrella. If it's an umbrella, then they're normally an employment model, so they are employing the contractor and paying PAYE and NIC anyway. So if that is the case, then IR35 isn't in point, because pay as you earn's already been deducted. If, however, it's an umbrella and they're interjecting themselves in there to do something which means that the contractor isn't fully PAYE, and trust me, there are models out there that do that, then it may well skip the umbrella and come back to the last agency in the chain. You just need to be it will depend on the contractual wording, if I'm being perfectly honest.
More than ever important to make sure that those arrangements are right ones, not some newfangled idea that kind of doesn't hold water.
Well, I saw one yesterday which was within the public sector, and it was aimed at, I won't go into any detail, but say a day rate of £1,000, in fact no, a weekly rate of £1,000, the worker was paid £250 taxed, and then the balance was paid as a capital investment payment.
Yeah, ouch.
Yeah.
Question from Nurthen.
Yeah, John, you were saying that this is a great opportunity for us to get on the front foot with clients and go and talk about this, but I guess only a limited amount of us in this room are tax lawyers or accountants. Do you think there's a boundary where we could actually be getting into an area where we get out of our depth and could actually have clients and contractors coming back to us saying, you advised us on this and it's now backfired, and HMRC or afterwards, where's that line which we shouldn't, as recruiters, perhaps be crossing?
Yeah, no, that's a fair concern, and I'll give you my business card later. So, no, in all sensible, I mean, what I'm trying to say to you is engage in the conversations with the client and make sure. The worst scenario is that somebody else thinks it's your fix and it isn't your fix, or you didn't even know it was your fix, or you think the client's doing it and they're not. So you don't find out about the sort of conversation that could have taken place until it becomes an issue that you can't deal with anymore. So it's really starting that discussion and finding out what the problem is and being honest with them in terms of the responsibilities to whose fix it's going to be.
And I think those of you that are members of trade associations like APSCo should be getting all the advice you need from.
You'll get the guidelines, and a lot of that stuff will be asking questions. Have you discussed with your accountancy firm where you are with regard to that kind of scenario? So they're questions rather than you must do this, you must do that, because we're not tax specialists, and it's quite complicated, this stuff.
And John referenced this before as well, but actually the definition around reasonable care, so it wouldn't constitute reasonable care for an end hirer to say I took the advice of a recruitment agency for tax advice. So therefore, your job is probably to facilitate discussions and create a network through trade bodies, professional advisors, to help create a combined solution.
Okay, question over here, and then I've got one over there.
Perfect. So probably for John Chaplin and Andrew, so there was a lot of interesting umbrella models that popped up in the public sector. We're hearing more and more about umbrella regulation that's going to be coming on, and key facts documents potentially as well. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Okay, Andrew, go for it.
Yeah, so not in terms of the detail. I guess in terms of as the market evolves, Brookson have always welcomed the fact that we want longevity in the market. We've always spearheaded compliance standards with our relationships with APSCo, the founders of FCSA. So I think it probably is something that will come in the future. I don't have the detail of what that is. It's a natural evolution of our sector, really, as it formalises and it matures.
So I'll take it a little bit more. So it is actually the regulation in the sector, if I'm being very sceptical, will not necessarily fix the problem of the bad boys. So as agencies, and I dare say the same client, the message goes to clients as well, is you have to do due diligence on your supply chain. So if you are using compliant supply chain today, there'll be compliance under new regulation, but I suspect there'll be non-compliant ones today that will still be non-compliant when any regulator has their view and transparency has to be done. We're still getting all sorts of non-compliance with legislation that's been in place for a long time. So the message I would say is don't rely just on a stamp, because do you know what, I know lots of organisations that have apparently got stamps on the back of the passports or whatever it may well be, and they're not as good as we'd all like them to be.
Okay.
Well, my question is about clients' attitude to risk, actually, and I'd like to hear what the panel's got to say on this.
Will you speak louder?
When IR35 and the public sector came in, there was little, if any, communication to the public sector bodies from HMRC, and now HMRC has made us all tax inspectors, so we all have to do our own communication with clients. But do you think there's going to be a fundamentally different attitude towards risk? Because frankly, an NHS trust, what's HMRC going to do to them? Our FTSE 100, FTSE 200 companies are our clients. They're right on this. They've got MSPs in place. They know their workers. The SMEs, the ones and twos that we will make most of our biggest margins on, they don't know about this, and what is the implication if they just ignore it or get it wrong? I suppose it's a bit of a crystal ball. How do you think the market will develop in that space?
John, if we look at risk, what do we think?
So I'll say two things which are slightly arguing against each other. Is this? Firstly, there's the 80-20 principle. So I'm not suggesting that 100% of the population have to do 100% of the work to be 100% compliant in this area, because I think everybody will just fail to do that. The average client I'm speaking to is I'm saying you need to be comfortable that if HMRC come out and see you in the next few years, they'll be asking you the following questions, and the questions are like, how many contracts do you have? In fact, actually, I probably share separately is the questions they are now asking public bodies as a result of the changes that came into 17. How many contracts do you have? How many have you put on the payroll in April 17? Who do you use? What do you pay them? Has your cost gone up? Has your turnover gone down? Or whatever it may well be. All those questions a client needs to be able to have those answers. If they've got a good story to tell, i.e. we've taken it seriously, we've done what we can, most HMRC inspectors will go, okay, you seem to have done enough. So that's one side, but the opposite side of that coin is if there is an error, broadly speaking, you're talking about 45% of whatever you pay a contractor will be the risk of tax and NIC liabilities, plus penalties, plus interest. So from a tax department, when I'm speaking to a client that spends, let's say £100 million a year, then that's 45 million plus penalties plus interest. It could be 50, 60 million pounds a year, and the HMRC can go back a minimum of 4 years, probably 6 years, up to 20 years. So they've got to manage that risk. So it doesn't mean that they've got to be perfect, but they've certainly got to do something about it.
I take your point about the big users.
Yeah.
I get that. It's just small, medium-sized enterprise clients.
Yeah.
I mean, really, are HMRC really going to be pouring over a software house with 30 contractors in? Have you gone through all of that? I mean, that's a message I've got back from our business when I've asked our open market consultants to go out, and the clients have gone, do we really need to worry about this?
Depends what they do with the payroll reporting. So one of the things that might not be clear for everybody in the public sector is 12 months, 18 months prior to the public sector reform going in, the public sector hires were already mandated by a Treasury directive to report on off-payroll workers. So as part of anybody that's not on your payroll. So they were feeding the revenue with the data and the MI of where this population is.
And the agency business does it through intermediaries reporting.
Yeah, and so you're right in terms of awareness and acceptance. It was probably, people were probably more aware in the public sector prior to it happening, and obviously the public sector are owned by the government, which wanted this to come through anyway. Now in the private sector, the ability to get round that, if that becomes into a payroll reporting as well, they're going to have to report on it as part of the day-to-day mandated processes.
I suppose that underlines my question. The public sector's attitude to risk on who's inside and outside of IR35, surely in the private sector, they're going to be much more risk averse. Many of our contractors in the public sector got outside decisions, but my feeling is that initially private sector clients are going to be much more risk averse to taking contractors outside of IR35 and the statement of work route.
I think, I mean, a positive thing about this legislation is that it ultimately puts the end user liable if there is misclassification. That's positive, no matter how complex the supply chain is. I think it's right that it's the end user that should be responsible for making sure that people are classified appropriately. But I absolutely agree with you that the problem is that we all know that HMRC is not properly resourced to enforce the legislation in the first place. There's going to be bad actors in this market. They're going to get away with it, despite the fact that most agencies are going to be professional and have decent standards to do this.
Probably 50% of the jobs that they'll automate, so they'll have automated tasks.
There you go.
Everybody will be fine.
Do you have a view with regard to the risks?
Well,
and to the
I mean,
costs? Are they going to insure themselves against this kind
Well, I
of
think,
thing?
obviously Kingsbridge's business is built around helping people in the supply chain sort of manage that risk, and historically that's been around PI mainly, but actually the risk around R35 is there today, and we've sold, I think, the last 12 months, 15,000 sort of tax investigation products, which pay for the cost of a tax investigation, but will also pay for the fines. We've just bought a business called Larson Howie, which is an R35 expert in terms of tax assessment. So this is something which we're sort of thinking about, obviously very hard, but we approach this, I guess, through the lens of you, the partners, and the risk for you, because I guess what's changed is where's the risk burden falling? And the truth is the risk burden will primarily fall with actually the agency, because you will be in many, many cases the fee payer. So what we're working on developing, and we have a product already which does this with certain, so we want to make it better. And I think, if you haven't heard from Tom, we might not hear him for at least 24 hours, but afterwards you will hear from him to sort of come and talk to you about this, because we'd actually like your help to sort of develop this product. But essentially what we're looking to do is recognise the fact that there will be people who are inside, and there will be people who are outside, and there will be people in the middle, and then you're going to have to make a decision one way or the other. And you need to work with people like EY and Brookson and the others in the market to help you make that assessment, because you will not be geared up, I expect, to do that yourselves unless you're of a certain scale. But any assessment where someone is outside R35, there is still a residual risk, because the thing to remember here is we're dealing with HMRC, who are by nature capricious, unpredictable, and will change the rules of the game when it suits them down the road. And they can go back 4 years, they can go back 6 years, they can go back 20 years, and that risk will sit ultimately on your balance sheets. So what you either have to sort of insure against that, or you have to, a bit like in the PI space, work with a reputable partner. I could think of one, who will actually allow you to construct a product that would actually allow the contractor to buy a product that would actually pay that fine, but pay the fine not to them, not pay out to them, but actually pay out to you, so you can then pay any fines or fees that come to you as that. So I think with this, it's about trying to recognise where the risk is and then construct product, and ultimately it's a risk appetite decision. You either live with that risk yourselves, or you try and find someone else to take that risk on board for you.
John, do you have a view?
Well, so the one thing I would just make clear, because just to hope it clarifies a little bit, is if HMRC have an issue and there's a liability, it will be the fee payer that gets the bill, so the agency.
Yeah. National insurance and income tax bill.
Absolutely. So it's nice for the client to have a relaxed view about liabilities that may not be theirs. Okay? So the way it works legally is you get the bill. You cannot go to HMRC and say, could you please send the bill to my client? You've got two choices then. You either commercially, so contractually, you're going to have to make sure you're watertight that those liabilities can be passed on. And if it's a small and medium enterprise, whether you can ever get that money back, I genuinely don't know. But you've still got to pay it to the taxman first. So the revenue will not stop their collection because you haven't got the money to pay it. Secondly, is you can ask HMRC to issue a notice of debt transfer to your client. So that might succeed, it might not succeed, but you can only do that by showing that they have not taken reasonable care. And you have to prove that. If you can't prove it, it won't happen. But even if you can prove it and it does happen, it doesn't mean that you're going to be in the nicest possible commercial terms with that client and maybe your wider client base. So I don't want to over-egg it. You're absolutely right. There is a lack of resource within HMRC to get all of it right all of the time. But what you're doing is, if you're not careful, you or your client is making you take a gamble that you're going to be the lucky one that doesn't get that visit.
The sector feels like it's in the spotlight.
Yeah, and you've already said you do the intermediaries returns. You're giving the information to HMRC today that they're going to use in compliance activity tomorrow.
Yeah, and do remember that HMRC would quite like a big show of someone crashing and burning in order to frighten everybody else to do it properly. So they will go for somebody, that's what they do. And also, if you don't have the things in place as a recruitment company, when someone comes in to buy you, that will take a huge percentage of the value of your business. So it's a bit, we have to do this, it's a pain in the arse. What was found in the public sector is a lot of people left, contractors left the public sector and went to the private sector because they could, but across the private sector, where else are they going to go? And so consequently, I wouldn't say a lot of people are going to leave that private sector, but it's going to be eaten up somewhere, but boy, we need to protect ourselves.
But like I say, and the critical thing is there are some risks which are insurable and some which aren't, and actually this is an insurable risk, provided you've had a test done by a reputable provider status assessment. That's a risk. You can choose to take it on, or you can find someone else to take it on for you.
Yeah, there you go. Another question. Yeah, go for it.
So there's a lot of tax advice and accountants obviously in times to learning methodology, working practices and power assessments. What's your view on HMRC honouring that if the CES tool obviously provides something inconclusive or inside out of 35? And do you think it's necessary for all contractors to take both the CES tool and potentially a more comprehensive one in the event that either HMRC changes down the line or they come challenge it?
Okay, CES tool, what do we think? John, do you have a view?
Start, yeah. So CES tool is HMRC's view of what the law says. So if you put in all the information correctly, so that's big if, and if HMRC agree with the answers you've given, another big if, and if as a result of that it gives you an outside of IR35 decision, you're home dry. But if it gives you an IR35 decision and HMRC don't agree with it, or you haven't put it in because you don't know the full working terms, then the CES tool is largely worthless. So I'm not saying never use it, but if you get an outside of IR35 decision out of the CES tool, make sure it's based on evidence that you can prove a year, 2 years, 5 years later. And if you can, and if your client agrees and the contractor agrees, you're fine. HMRC will not seek to look behind that. The trouble is, and we're already seeing it, they are challenging outside of IR35 decisions being given by their own tool, because they then go, well, no, given that information, I wouldn't have answered it in that way, I would have answered it in that way, and oh, look, it's in IR35 now.
I just think this is one of those areas where automation may eventually catch up with it, but at the moment, I think the human element can't be overstated enough, because there are so many considerations that go into deciding whether someone is inside or outside, that I think a test might help you identify the people who are clearly out and the people who are clearly in. But maybe to answer that test, you need to answer 5 questions, not 100. Yeah. But it's the 90% or 80% who'll be in the middle, where you need somebody to look at it and actually go through it from a 360 perspective, which I think a test will always struggle to do. Certainly the next 3-5 years.
Andrew, do you agree?
I completely agree with what's been covered today. I think one of the interesting elements of this is, do you think that the HMRC would see CEST as reasonable care? So the head hire said, I just use CEST. It doesn't work in that scenario for me because of how subjective it is, how flawed it is, how it ignores mood and elements like that. So I think getting a proper diligence review and a relationship that actually, these are going to go from contract to contract to contract now, so I think relying on CES wouldn't be our advice.
Yeah. There's also a danger that if you normally when you're completing that, you're completing it before they've set foot on the client premises. So they're answering a question theoretically as to what they might do in a week or 2 or 2 years' time. So use CEST as a tool to inform the overall thing. Don't ever use it as the be-all and end-all unless it's absolutely slam dunk and it's clear you're outside of IR35. And that's fine. You've got the CEST output to sort of your extra sort of get out of jail free card. But if in doubt, you've got to look at it in the wider view. Otherwise, you're in danger of relying on something that you shouldn't be relying on.
Yeah. Another question. Oh, Okay, I thought we were trying. Oh, I'll go with you and then I'll come to you as a second. Go for it.
So we're naturally talking about IR35, which has a lot of focus on the next 18 months, but lurking in the background is the Taylor Review. So does the panel have a view or any foresight on how the Taylor Review may further impact us as an industry?
Good question. The Taylor Review. Anyone know anything about the Taylor Review? Anyone want to volunteer to know anything about the Taylor Review?
You're looking at me there, aren't you?
Well, I'm looking at anybody here who wants to. I don't want to pounce on some poor devil.
Shall I start? Yeah.
Go for it.
Right. So, it will impact on everything, but it will have. I think it will be a little while before we get there. Could be years, and I'm even using years, perhaps hesitantly. The trouble is with the tax and employment law we've got today, it is not fit for purpose for the way of working today. My concern is that we will change that law in 5 years' time or whatever else it may well be, and it will be already out of date by the time that law comes in. So, because it will just take them a long time to get there. So in theory, if they change the employment tests under Taylor, it will have an impact on IR35 and everything else like that. But my great fear is that they would tweak around the edges. It will still not be fit for purpose, and you will still have at least as many, if not more, employment tribunal cases as a result of what does it mean to be an employee and do I have rights under this, that, or the other. So unless they really, really grab it, shake it up, and make it fit not just for today but for the future, we'll just have a different number of tests in order to cause us difficulties.
And the other thing, these things aren't joined up in government departments, are they? So actually, whatever happens from a Taylor Review point of view, nobody's thought to have that discussion at the Treasury and therefore HMRC. There was a view mentioned in the Taylor Review that it should be more joined up, but it hasn't been at all. James,
all I was going to say, the only thing about the Taylor Review is you've got to remember this is sort of high politics, really. I mean, this is sort of, and so the danger of it is that it gets hijacked for political purposes rather than doing what it actually was trying to achieve in the first place. So I think, I can imagine a Corbyn government actually taking selected elements of that and accelerating them quite aggressively, not driven by any underlying financial rationale, but just because they're sort of fulfills the sort of philosophy that they're trying to bring into place, particularly around gig working, I guess.
Yeah. And I think the thing that's most likely to do that is the tension between being an employee for tax purposes and employment law. So as IR35 in the private sector rolls out, there will be large waves of unhappy people, as again John referred to before, and the political noise and using that as almost a vulnerable working tool. I mean, that's the most likely, in my view, cause to try and stoke that into bringing it shorter time frame rather than a longer one.
Yeah, John?
So Matthew Taylor spoke at our conference last year, by coincidence, and I thought that his recommendations were pretty good. I don't know. And
we did.
You were involved in a lot of the negotiations with him.
We were the first people to be invited to be involved in the discussions.
And I thought his recommendations were good. Of course, most of them have been ignored by the government.
They've been a bit busy, John, on other things.
That's true. Distracted. But I mean, I think there's still, we're working in an environment where legislation hasn't caught up with modern working practices. So these online staffing platforms, where they're taking no responsibility for tax or social insurance charges, how is that fair to staffing firms? Why are they different? Why are they treated so differently? Why is temporary agency law so different to law that deals with freelance workers? We've still got some catching up to do.
I think that there's another thing to suggest as well. So we had an APSCo meeting yesterday where we had Lord Wood of Anfield, not the Anfield that I think of from a football term, somewhere in Kent, never heard of it. But the reality is that everything would change under a Labour government, certainly if it's a Corbyn kind of government. That was mentioned earlier on, because part of the Labour manifesto is that there's a whole load of things that they would like to do from an employment point of view relatively quickly. Now, there may not be a general election because there might be a vote of no confidence in Theresa May from her own party. People think not likely. So that might be a leadership thing, but in order to have an early general election, there needs to be a vote of no confidence throughout the whole Parliament That's viewed to be pretty unlikely because nobody's quite sure what an outcome would be. And Tories generally don't want to have the thought of somebody like Jeremy Corbyn coming in, so they would probably stick together whatever happened. And the DUP probably would do the same thing, and therefore they're just about the majority for that point of view. But if there were something coming in, there's also the view that early on next year there's going to be the boundary changes from the constituencies, and that's going to very detrimentally affect the Labour Party and some Tory backbenchers. And so the likelihood of an early general election and a Corbyn government, although the swing needed to put a Corbyn government in is 3-point-something%. That's a bit scary for most of us in this room, I would suggest. So if there were a change, then the whole load of that staff, although it was kind of pretty much perceived quite warmly from the Labour Party, it's a different Labour Party from last year, even. And therefore the Chamber Review seems like nice ideas, and we think it was well done and well researched, smart, able cookie, but the whole political landscape looks like it's changing anyway. So whether any of that comes into practice is, anybody's guess. But are they joined up? No, not the slightest. But no, departments are not joined up. And from those kind of things, the Treasury always wins, don't they, John? Treasury always wins. Got the most smart, able people in the Treasury from the civil service point of view, and they are the most powerful department by tenfold. I made up tenfold, but it could be underfold. But you know what I mean? 6.2% fold. Sounds more as I receive but by a big margin, and so the Treasury always wins. So I don't think it will end up being joined up. Sorry, just sort of on top of the politics of it a minute. Kind of interesting time frame. Another question.
So I thought I kind of knew a lot about the kind of on-payroll working legislation until recently I was asked a question, well actually it came up in a couple of forums that I attended, which is my understanding under the on-payroll working is that employee benefits is not impacted in that sense, but someone raised the question around AWR, so if you're deemed as inside IR35, does AWR apply? Should we be obtaining comparative data for these new limited companies inside IR35? And I'm not sure that answer has been properly, the question hasn't been answered accurately for me as to what to do with that or whether there was any implication.
Does anyone feel confident to give an accurate answer on that? Andrew, do you have a view?
My initial reaction would be no, because they would still be engaging via their own limited company and just with the employment taxes removed before they come through. But that is not the basis of the tax experts.
Right.
What about a tax? Have we got any tax experts in the building?
Okay.
John?
So I agree. I don't think AWR or indeed worker rights generally apply. Subject to one caveat, I'll come back to in a minute, is because the IR35 is what's known as a deeming provision. It deems them to be employees for the purposes of PAYE and NIC only. It doesn't make them employees. It doesn't give them any other rights at all. The caveat is we are already seeing cases being taken, and one was published this week, I think it was, whereby somebody who was an employee had swapped over to a limited company contract and then had that contract ended and was able to go to an employment tribunal and get rights as an employee for unfair dismissal, even though they were contracting through their own limited company, because the court heard that actually nothing had changed, there'd been a figment put in the way. So with the caveat is just having a limited company in itself doesn't mean you can't be an employee in theory, but if you are properly a business-to-business relationship, then all of the other stuff doesn't get kicked in. That answer the question?
Yeah.
Yes or not really?
No, it does. I think it's just, I think there will be more cases like this out there where limited contractors deemed as inside are going to challenge it further, and I think they are challenging it.
Absolutely. One of the big messages we're giving to our clients' HR teams is whether or not they'll be successful, you will have a number of employment claims that you will have to defend or settle And so you've got to gear up for doing that, because if you've got 1,000 contractors, you're going to have, I don't know, 40 or 50 claims minimum, I would suggest. So what, are you geared up to dealing with those or settling them? And that usually means that the HR teams and the legal teams look into their coffee mugs at that moment and can't answer.
And John referred to a lot around pace in terms of doing this, and there's a human emotional change curve element to this. And I think the sooner that the client starts opening dialogue with the workers and talking to them, for as much as I don't think ultimately that will remove people bringing claims, it will certainly take heat out of it, and it is an emotional reaction in a lot of cases this as well, so it's another reason to engage with your hirers early on.
It's emotional because you can be taking 45% of their pay rate.
Yeah.
That's why it's emotional.
Yeah, no, completely.
Yeah.
There's just, my view is it's going to be a flight to perm. There's no cost benefit of taking anybody £400 a day inside IR35, £500 inside IR35. You might as well get them perm or fixed term.
Yeah.
Why would you hire a limited company contractor to do that job? And inside IR35. And it, there's different, I think, comparisons to the public sector in the market sense don't apply here because it's a bizarre market in itself. But I think it's going to reduce the overall number of limited company contractors and that marketplace in the UK, personally.
I would agree to some extent. However, if you look at the public sector and plotted it on a graph, you'd see number of contractors, limited company contractors, dip, and it's flattened off, and it's now getting back to the level where in the public sector it was about at the level in April 17. So yes, there will be, and there always is when new tax legislation comes in the contracting space, a negative reaction.
But it's not it's not anywhere near what it was pre-April 17.
I think if you take the NHS out, it might be far more accurate. So you take the NHS out, because that is an anomaly. I think the rest of the public sector bodies, I think, not too far.
And is that because...
Sorry, Richard. Last question, because we're on time.
We don't have public sector business, but is that because the workers are accepting that they're going to be paying the tax and NIC, or is it because the employer is getting more creative in structuring, perhaps SOW type arrangement?
There's a variety of
So
reasons.
the question was, if you couldn't hear it over here at the back, is that because the contractors taken, bitten the bullet with regard to paying more tax and national insurance, or is that because the client has become a bit more creative about the way they engage that person?
So there's a variety. It's a simple answer to that one. Contractors have become, we've found the ways of working have changed, so that the end engager gets more comfortable that IR35 doesn't apply. We've also had the balance between panic measures at the beginning. Now they've got more settled in terms of what it means to be inside IR35 or not. We've also found that the instant reaction was to put everybody on the books, and then we've got nobody on the books because they've all left. So there's a variety of reasons, and I haven't got the stats to point at each one, but absolutely there are some sectors that have been, and within the public sector, some departments that have been more keenly affected by it. But I think Andrew's right. If you ignore the NHS side of things, broadly speaking, it's flattened out and is now, broadly speaking, back to where it was in April 17. Can't tell you the line-by-line details for that, I'm afraid.
Okay. Thank you. Great question. Weren't shorter questions by any stretch of the imagination. Let me bring this to a close by saying this. I've been in the recruitment market for 30-odd years. There's been loads of swathes of different legislation that is always a pain in the arse to us, and some of it is a bit of a pain in the arse to our client base. And they all end up to become a status quo that we're more used to. Not a damp squib, that's perhaps an exaggeration of it, but we all get used to working in a new way over a period of time, even though we never ever want the changes to take place. When IR35 was first mooted from 1999 and then came into effect, the view was, a strong view, that contractors would leave the UK in droves. For some reason, the view was that they would all go to Belgium. I don't know why. The taxation in Belgium was far worse, always. And it didn't really happen. But actually the burden of these different, these changes seem to always fall on us. when I was first in the recruitment market, it was very much a sales scenario where individual consultants were selling to individual decision makers about individual contracts. In fact, when I first started, there were hardly any contracts or a perm market, and then hey presto, contract came in. So that really does age me. But what I would say is this, that as we had on one of John's slides about the sophistication of decision making in buying our services, I think there's been, and I totally agree with that, there's been quite a swathe of people that instead of buying our services because our salespeople, our recruitment consultants, or even the bigger gun salespeople in the business are selling it well, they're starting to buy our services because we are seen as compliant, safe, from distancing those clients from some of these big ticket issues. And what I think that means for a recruitment company is that the back office that you have has never been more important, and maybe we should make that the number one, or number two certainly, sales point for when we're pitching for new business. Safety, compliance, risk averse, and risk covering solutions rather than I'll try harder to fill your requirement. That, I believe, more and more is what the customer base are looking from us, not just the bum on the proverbial seat, but the way of us working in partnership. For smart, able recruitment companies, that's an opportunity, and it's different to what it was. It's a different sell, it's a different service delivery, it's a different investment from your business point of view in making sure that that back office is meaty and the big sales point that you've got to win and keep good business and protect both your customers but ourselves as we move forward. Okay, phew, thank you so much to our panel. Round of applause, big one.